Good morning and welcome to the Teagasc ConnectEd Webinar on the 5 ways to improve grass utilisation on dairy farms. My name is Tom O'Dwyer and I'm Head of Dairy Knowledge Transfer with Teagasc. I'll be your host for this morning's webinar, which we are broadcasting live from Teagasc Moore Park, County Cork. I'm joined by my Teagasc colleagues, Michael O'Donovan, Head of Grassland Science, and John Marr, Campaign Manager with Grass 10. This is the first in a series of Teagasc ConnectEd webinars that will take place over the coming 2 months. The series will offer exclusive insights into the latest work by Teagasc in the areas of science, policy and practice, all of which will be of interest to those working in the agri-food industry. So if you find this morning's webinar interesting, please tell more people, please tell others about the upcoming webinars. Further details are available on the Teagasc ConnectEd webpage at www.teagasc.ie/connected. Before we get started, just a couple of technical items. If you're having any difficulty with the webinar this morning, you can email the ConnectEd email address. That's connected@teagasc.ie. And we'd also like you to interact and engage with the webinar, and you can do that by submitting a question. There is an image of it on the screen at the moment. So you use the question section on the webinar sidebar. You type and submit your question. We will receive it here and we will endeavour to deal with as many of your questions as possible. And finally then, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you afterwards. So we're just about ready to start, and to introduce my two guests this morning, as I said, Michael O'Donovan, Head of Grassland Science with Teagasc, and John Marr, Campaign Manager with Grass 10. Michael, to you first, could you tell our listeners a little bit about the work of the Grassland Science Department and maybe the type of research that's currently being undertaken?
Okay, Tom. So the Grassland Science Department is based across Oak Park, where Pat Conlon is a grass breeder, Athenry, where we have Philip Cretan and Tim Keeley, in Grange we have Claire Guy, and in Moore Park then there's myself, Mike Egan, Deirdre Hennessy, Brendan Horn, Emer Kennedy, Elodie Ruel. So I suppose kind of the masses here in Moore Park. So the focus of the Grassland Department, I suppose, is to increase overall animal ruminant output from pasture, and that is through better grass utilisation. In Pat's case, on the breeding side, to deliver varieties that have higher overall dry matter production, better quality, and high in the PPI list. And from Philip and Tim's perspective, it's getting more output from pasture on the sheep side, Claire on the beef side, and then ourselves here in Moore Park, I suppose, where we're looking at the whole area of grass physiology. Pasture base is a big part of our work here in Moore Park, where we have now an area fronting pasture base, and then we deliver the pasture profit index from the Department of Ag sites here, which is just published there about a fortnight ago. And then I suppose Mike Egan, Deirdre Hennessy, Brian McCarthy would all have major grassland experiments. Deirdre and Brian in their cases on clover, Brian and Clonakilty, Deirdre here in Moore Park. Mike Egan then is on the whole area of autumn closing of pasture and its interaction, or the effect on spring grass supply, and that dictated by spring rotation planners. Emer Kennedy then, who is fronting the once a day trial that we have started here. We started it last year, but this year is a bit different. We have full once a day herd here in Moore Park, which can compare to a full twice a day, the normal, like the classical twice a day herd, but also we have sub treatments of 2 week once a day, like what happens at the farm every 4 week and 6 weeks. So that trial is ongoing at the moment, and Emer's in front of that. So so then we have about, in total, I think in the Grassland Science Department we have 24 Walsh fellowships. So that's a huge critical mass. And I'd say,
so they're all working with the permanent researchers?
Pretty much, yeah, and not too many of them are, a lot of them are core funded, so I suppose they're coming from dairy levy, on the dairy levy work and on the core funded work. And some of our stimulus grants have expired in the last couple of months, and then Vista Milk is starting in earnest in the next couple of months. So
there's a number of different projects which I think we'll come back to during the course of the webinar. You've mentioned Pasture Base Ireland, which most definitely I want to come back to, and hopefully we'll get back when we talk about the Pasture Profit Index and Clover as well. That certainly was on my list of things to talk with you about. John, you're campaign manager for Grass 10. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the activities that you and your team are involved in? I suppose it's really to try and carry on from the research work that Michael and his team are undertaking. You're the link to the farmer.
Yeah, so it's just following on from Michael's objectives of the grassland department to improve the level of grass grown and utilised. That's what Grass 10 is about, to improve the level of grass production at farm level, close to 13 or 14 tonnes. I'll come back to that a little in a sec, Thomas, I suppose, and to try and get that grass eaten. So it's called the Grass 10 campaign because we're trying to utilise 10 tonnes of grass grown per hectare. So in order to achieve that, you have to grow 13 or 14 tonnes. It's also called Grass 10 because we are trying to achieve 10 grazing paddocks or 10 grazing rotations per paddock per year. That's why it's called Grass 10. So then to relate to the activities at farm level to try and achieve those goals, Tom, we have on-farm events. They're ongoing in the spring through January, February and March, right? So we do those through the season. We also do them in summer and the autumn. I suppose coming up now very soon are the Grassland Farmer of the Year events. So we have a competition with our partners on that. And there's awards for, different enterprises. But I suppose in terms of the dairy farms, we have about 5 dairy winners, and their events coming up through the months of March, April, and May, right, and again in September. The other things we do then, we obviously have the weekly bulletin that's the Grass 10 weekly bulletin that's on the Pasture Base website, www.pbi.ie. And I suppose the final thing then that we put a lot of thought into is the grass courses, and this is going out at farm level, bringing groups of farmers together and try and get them to improve the level of grassland production and I suppose grassland measurement.
And that's a big project for you this year, those grassland courses?
Yes, they've just started in the month of February. They're across the country. There's about 60 of them in place. If people are interested and want to join them, talk to the local advisor. They coordinate them ourselves in Grass 10.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, what I'd like to start off with, the webinar is titled the 5 Ways to Increase Grass Utilisation, and a number of them have been mentioned in your commentary so far. But I suppose if we were to take, say, the current grazing situation and to talk about that in some little bit of detail, we'll probably hit on a number of the 5 different ways of increasing grass utilisation. So maybe to start with you, Michael, and it'll bring in Pasture Base Ireland. What do we know about, say, grass growth rates at the moment from the data coming through from Pasture Base?
Yeah, so at the moment, farm covers are up about 20% in a normal year, and grass production is up about 60% as well. So we've had phenomenal overwinter growth from all the way through from October, December, January. Soil temperatures, averaging 8 degrees in this side here, and that's reflective of what the overwinter growth that was carried through on farms. So variation of 6 down to or up to 10 kilos of growth, which is a phenomenal movement away, from let's say the norms we'd expect 4. So that has had a knock-on effect on a huge level of grass supply on the farms, and I suppose we had a really good February. A lot of people are on target with their grazing and turnout going well, and very, very different February to last year. However, I suppose while growth hasn't subdued in any way in the last number of weeks, and in fact, the growth rate at the moment is around 17 kilos, John. The predicted growth will be up around the 20 mark or 20 to 25 mark from Italy's model. So, like from a grass growth perspective, very, very positive for 2019. Grass utilisation then in the last 10 days probably has been fairly tricky, and even this morning, a lot of rainfall, and I suppose John's probably going to deal with it. Some utilisation. Utilisation is tricky at the moment as regards higher covers and just damper conditions to deal with and what we're used to.
but a lot more grass on farms. And does that bring its own challenges, John, in terms of utilisation? What are you finding in dealing with farmers and at the events you're attending and so on?
Yeah, look, Michael's right. We look at the average figures on Pasture based on the 1st of February in terms of farm cover, they're around 1,000. We look at them the 1st of March, they're around 1,000. So that tells you very quickly the amount of grass that we, was eaten on farm was more or less the amount equals the amount of grass that was grown. So February has come good. Michael's touched on that. So people have got going in terms of grazing. They've reached pretty close to target percentages, to be honest. But there's challenges now, as Michael has alluded to. So yeah, the big challenge now is that a lot of the low covers have been grazed off, which to reach those percentages, which makes sense. But now we have more cows calved, we have animals with higher intake, and they're more conditioned for grazing. However, what's making it challenging is the grazing conditions, right? So the grass is there, the cows are there. The challenge is to get this grass eaten. So you have to improvise here now, really, to deal with the tricky grazing conditions.
Okay, so I was on a farm myself last week, and we walked across at a cover of somewhere between 1,500 and maybe 1,800.
Yes,
what you describe as a good or ideal grazing cover for the middle of the summer, or maybe even slightly strong, and cows are going to have to face into that with probably less than ideal roadway access. It's a big field.
Yeah.
So what do farmers do in that situation? Or what would your advice be?
Yeah, well, three things have to happen, Tom. The cows have to be set up for grazing. So obviously then, like the one thing that affects the cow's intake more than that else of grazing and their appetite to graze is the amount of silage in the diet.
Okay.
Right. I admit that meal also has an effect, but silage has a greater effect.
Okay.
So the animals have to go out with an edge in their appetite. So they have to be set up to do that. So having a lot of silage in front of a cow at 7 a.m. in the morning, giving her meal and milking, and ask her to go out then at 8 o'clock, half 8, 9 o'clock to graze, you're compromised straight away. And when the conditions are difficult, she's not going to be, I suppose, tuned in for grazing, conditioned for grazing, and therefore, there may be a level of rebellion, and the animals may be upset. So, you have to get them out and get them grazing. So, setting, the cow up to graze is important.
Okay.
Right. The next thing then is the farm, right? And you have to be smart about this, is the word I'd use. Like, so if you have a difficult field, be in the difficult part of it during the day, and when you're going out to graze at night, be very close to the roadway, so it's easy to bring the animals in. And Michael and his team have done a lot of work over the years in terms of on-off grazing. We know this that works very well at farm level, provided that the cows are conditioned to graze, provided that the infrastructure in the farm is reasonably well set up, but that can be improvised upon, and provided that you're set up yourself to work this as the farmer.
So can I bring Michael in on that, on the research on the on-off grazing that John referred to? What does that research tell us, Michael?
Yeah, so I suppose the dairy cow is interesting from the perspective is most of their intake is I suppose focused around the milking period, sunrise and sundown. And like previous to us doing on-off grazing, we would have been looking at some of the research coming from France, feeding maize silage and the effect on grazing and all that. So that's when we got the idea for on-off grazing. How can we, manipulate intake? And we know anyway from our grazing behaviour figures that a cow grazes probably between 9 and 11 hours a day, that she's not continually grazing for the full 24 hours. And most of that is pitched during the period in the morning and in the afternoon. So what we did then was we tried to capitalise on that by, allocating in periods of, tough weather conditions and poor enough conditions, that we would optimise the intake focused around a time slot around that milking period.
Okay. In
the morning, just after milking, where some of the grazing bouts can be quite long. You can have some individual cows who have 4.5 hours of a full grazing bout. So, and that's what the concept of on-off grazing was, to optimise their intake around that time. Okay. And Emer's first couple of first experiment found that where we had 2 3-hour grazing periods around that milking time, 3 in the morning, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. There was 3 kilos concentrate supplemented at that time with those cows, and that's important to say. They got no silage, they received no silage, and they were achieving 95% of the intake of cows on a full 24-hour break.
Okay.
So that was the concept, and that has proved fairly fruitful for ourselves in poor weather conditions, and for the farmers out there, whether it's dry land or wetter land. Even last night, the cows here they were taken off at 9 o'clock because it was raining, and they stood off. And they went back out this morning again.
Right.
The forecast for the next couple of days is poor, and that's been replicated out there at farm level. So it was probably a nice piece of work, and it was it's actually one of the most practical pieces of research we've ever done, and it's actually one of the most cited papers in JDS from here, so it's interesting.
Okay, and John, what's the resistance at farm level to practicing that? Because it seems like a very useful technology. So what is the resistance amongst farmers? Because
there is a level of resistance, and to me it revolves around the silage and the diet, Tom. But I'll come back to that. But farmers have adapted to to the grazing conditions that are there. You just have to be, again, I'll come back to be smart about it. If you have a paddock that has a roadway on two sides, well, that's the place to be by night, because it's easy to get in, get out. Right, during the day, to use use some of the more difficult paddocks and use the cow corridor or cow track down the side, about 4 foot wide, and the animals will go down along and gradually come back to you, and you operate that in daylight.
Okay.
The other thing that's important is that the farmer takes time to walk the farm, right, and to find out where the best areas are in terms of access, where the best ground conditions are, where the right grass is to graze, so that it's not a rush or panic decision, and that the cows go in and do the job that they're supposed to do.
There's an amount of planning required.
There is amount of planning. That's why I say you have to have the cow set up, you have to have the farm set up, and have to have yourself set up.
Okay.
Right? And the last piece that's important, Tom, is that the farmer has to be flexible, which is have 1, 2 or 3 areas identified that you can go where conditions are tricky. Have the pigtails or the temporary posts and the reels of wire ready for this.
Okay, not to be going looking for them in the morning.
Yes.
Okay, right. The next area then I want to talk about is and you both commented that there's very high covers of grass and that growth rates have been good so far this year. Fertilizer drives grass growth. Let's talk about the application of nitrogen first. What is your experience, Michael? Is there data coming through on Pasture base that indicates fertilizer has been spread, or what is your experience to date?
Yeah, I suppose this year has been. We alluded to it earlier in the conversation, but good soil conditions, good trafficability conditions, high soil temperatures. A lot of farms got nitrogen in mid to late January, and there's no doubt in our mind that the growth rates that are out there at the moment are being definitely assisted by that nitrogen being utilised, very well utilised. So I suppose our guide is 70 units of nitrogen spread for the 1st of April. That includes some slurry, and yes, this year is a bit different. I suppose some guys might be a bit apprehensive about going again with nitrogen, but to me, it's really important for the carryover effect of having nitrogen in the system for sustaining growth in April and May. And that's one of the key things with early nitrogen. The later you go with nitrogen, generally the less the response is. Okay. So that's a really important message from us here.
When you talk about this carryover effect, because you're after emphasizing it there, it would strike me as particularly significant that you're not really applying the fertilizer for growing grass for the rest of March. It's into April, isn't it?
It's in April, yeah. And there is, I suppose there's an immediate effect, and then there's the carryover effect with nitrogen. And I suppose what people see is, okay, I'll delay the application of nitrogen to March, and the grazing takes place, let's say, in the end of March. In some cases, they may not see the response to nitrogen that you will see if you go earlier with that nitrogen, and then there's nitrogen still in the plant, still available for sustaining growth in April. Now that needs to be topped up, and that's why in many farms that we see that are growing really good levels of grass in April and May, that's where it's fair to say that's where the 70 units are there in April, and you get that carry through into those other 2 months. Okay. So I suppose that's really an important effect, and I suppose we have to be careful here. We're not talking about ad hoc nitrogen spreading. We're obviously using slurry, which is the first nutrient that's on the farm. Cost-effective nutrient, and high-quality slurry is a very, very good fertilizer. But then we're trying to make sure that we're manipulating the grass growth curve and optimizing it to what we can do, because we all know if we don't get good May growth rates, the idea of first surplus silage coming out of the system, it won't happen if there's no nitrogen out there. And there's a lot of farmers out there who need that surplus grass conserved this year.
Okay, I just see a question after coming in from one of our listeners this morning. It's just to take you back to the on-off grazing piece and just deal with that question. Are there any adverse effects if cows are left on-off grazing for maybe a sustained period, maybe of, I don't know, a fortnight, maybe? You know, if the weather kind of stays as it is, maybe for until the 1st of April. Can you, or John or Michael, would you like to comment on that?
I think Michael will do a better job answering on the research side.
Yeah,
They've looked at this, to be honest.
So we did that study over a full month period.
Okay, 4 weeks.
4 weeks. And we didn't, again, 3 kilos of concentrate being going in, the allowance of 15 kilos of grass. So, you know, you could say the full allowance for on-off, and that trial was 18 kilos. No, they didn't need 18 kilos. But through that trial, we didn't see any negative effects on body condition score. But to my mind, that would be the limits of on-off. That was the limits of on-off that month. Okay. After that, I would be thinking that you know, you probably need to come in with some extra supplementation. Okay. But to me, the 28 days was probably enough. Okay. We didn't pursue that any longer. We did it in the autumn again, but a month was probably the longest that we've done.
Okay. All right. And then another question from a listener, John, for you, I suppose, in relation to the fertilizer and the nitrogen. If you've got, it says if you have high covers, you know, good strong covers of grass that haven't been grazed yet, and they've already got their first application of nitrogen, and you're thinking about spreading your second round of nitrogen on, you know, so obviously you want to cover the land that's grazed. What about the paddocks that haven't been grazed yet? And to pick up on Michael's point there about, you know, topping up the nitrogen and this carryover effect. What's your view? These high covers, first application of nitrogen on, you're about to put on the fertilizer spreader if the weather turns suitable and go at the second round. What's your advice?
Yeah, look, the advice is fairly simple, that the nitrogen goes out on these high covers, right? Michael touched on this. It's all about sustaining growth, right? So if you have a very high cover of grass, when you graze that down, right, it'll be white or yellow at the base. So the recovery time is actually going to take longer, right? We need this grass back in April. If the nitrogen is not out, the level of recovery in this will be, you know, substantially reduced. The sward actually, or the roots have to work hard to get the plant to regenerate its leaves. So you need the nitrogen in the system. There is a reluctance there at farm level at the moment, which we're dealing with in the grass courses. You know, about spreading nitrogen high covers. I will wait. Yes. You shouldn't wait. Particularly if the nitrogen went out in the middle of January that Michael touched on. We're now, you know, 7 or 8 weeks after that. You know, the one thing the nitrogen has done in early January is help store these covers. We see it at farm level, or observed where people decide to skip some of the high covers, like the level of deterioration in the sward has already started. There's yellowing, you know, the growing point is elevated in the plant. So, you know, you're trying to avoid all that, right? So the nitrogen has kept these swards much greener and will also help, you know, the plant recover after being grazed. However, we are due, if not applied already, the second application of nitrogen, and we're now grazing the higher covers. So they need that nitrogen in the system to sustain the growth. And you know, there's kind of a reluctance or a hesitancy to apply nitrogen, and some people are trying to follow on, and that can work to a degree. But like if you apply nitrogen in January and you're grazing a high cover by the end of March, that period is way too long for me, way too long to spread. So it needs to go out now, if at all possible. I know the grazing conditions and the weather's not ideal at the moment, but the first chance we get these high covers need nitrogen applied, and we go back to the targets that Michael outlined, which is the 70 units through a combination of slurry and nitrogen. That's sacrosanct.
Okay, but we're waiting for the right conditions to spread the fertilizer.
The high covers are the one piece of the farm that really need nitrogen applied.
Okay. Right, okay, so I think we dealt with most aspects. Oh, sorry, the other aspect of the current is the other fertilizer element is the phosphorus and potash. John, and I know, you know, you have put a lot of emphasis on this through the Grass 10 campaign and through the newsletters and various items that you've written over the last number of months, I suppose. What's your advice? You know, P and K, I suppose you have to get it on at some time during the year, but take the current period, March.
Okay, so we'll deal with the first application of P and K. To me, revolves around the slurry, and Michael's touched on this. Right, it's there on the farm. this will provide P and K, I suppose, particularly on the size ground if you're grazing that. So, you know, if slurry went out in January, great. If it went out in February, great. We still have a window of opportunity to apply some slurry on the grazing ground, although that window's getting narrower now, and the volume will have to come down, right? But if it's going on the silage ground, then we can do an awful lot in terms of P's and K's for the silage ground, right, in terms of applying slurry. However, I suppose to come back to the grazing ground, Tom, we would like some P and K to go out in the right weather conditions. It's not the cheapest fertilizer, so you really want the conditions to be right. They weren't bad at all in February if people took that opportunity. I admit that they're tricky at the moment, but if the weather picks up, then we'll look at applying, you know, your second tranche of fertilizer very, very soon. If you have 30 units gone out in January or February, you're looking at getting 40 units out now. So to me, then 2 bags of 18-6-12 plus sulphur will meet, you know, the nitrogen requirement, the sulphur requirement, and in particular the P requirement for the first half of for the season. If March doesn't come good, we still have that opportunity in April. I also work in the heavy soils program, so we look at the 18-6-12 really supplying the P's and K's and sulphur in April on the heavier land. But in the next 6 weeks, we need this P's and K's out, right?
And I was talking to some
advisors. To stimulate spring growth, yeah.
Okay, I was talking to some advisors recently, and they were talking about farmers who have no key allowance because of they're in the derogation. And the high level of concentrates fed last year, and it's all part of the calculation, and suddenly they have no fertilizer P allowance. Do they have to rely wholly then on the slurry?
Yeah, but like the slurry will do that. Now you have to be strategic with it, right? Obviously, the paddocks that have, you know, the lowest indexes should be getting the slurry, and the paddocks with the higher indexes shouldn't be.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's tricky at farm level, and I understand that. But you have to be more strategic with the slurry and use the slurry as your form of P's and K's to fix, you know, where indexes are low, right? That's where it should be targeted, right? So that's there, and we just have to make better use of it. We need the P in the first, you know, 3 or 4 months of the year. It is vital for spring grass production and vital to try and kick start the whole growing season. And Michael touched on this about getting growth rates up in May. If we're compromising nitrogen and compromising P, we're going to have reduced growth rates in May.
Michael, John mentioned sulphur. It seems to have taken on an increased significance or importance in more recent years. Would be maybe my impression. I could be wrong on that. How important is sulphur, and how important is to get sulphur out, say, in April into May?
Yeah, I think there's probably two elements, Tom. I think there's the K element as well. Much of the discussion has been on P, but I think there's two things there: the K and sulphur. And you know, the ratio that we talk about here is 10-to-1 for nitrogen to P, and it's 10-to-1 for K to sulphur. Okay. So, like what I see on a lot of farms now is a huge deficit of K on.
Not enough potash.
Not enough potash going out. You know, a lot of wrong bale silage being taken off, and you know that there's no recycling in wrong bale silage, whether it's surplus grass or whatever. So you know, and we've looked at some of the higher producing farms on this. You know, they're actually in, you know, a lot of their index, you know, 1 and 2 for K, which is a deficit now for them, and there's no derogation around K, which is the other thing. And then for sulphur, let's say for sulphur, okay, we're getting less and less from the atmosphere. So that means that, you know, the plant, you know, does want that for photosynthesis. And I would be, you know, saying, you know, even on the second round now, that we should be probably topping up with sulphur. That you know, we should be moving with sulphur on the second
in March.
I think so, yeah, because again, it's about, you know, having it out. You know, a lot of the grass that you'll see when we get to April and we start getting some surge in growth. You know, a pure deficiency of sulphur is purple tips and pasture on the top of the sward, and you'll see that, and especially see it in silage ground. So you know, for me, you know, sulphur, you know, for the guys that are topping up from now on, they should be purchasing some product with you know 5% sulphur or AS in it.
Okay, so nitrogen plus sulphur is the recommendation.
I think so, yes.
Okay. Right, so I want to move on now to, we've dealt with the fertilization, the infrastructure I think we've probably touched on, John, but maybe just to finish that out with yourself, you know, what do you view as the level of adequacy of infrastructure on the typical Irish dairy farmer? Have you a view on that? And also then, if a farmer is to improve infrastructure, what sort of investment could be required? You know,
Yeah, so I suppose I'll start with investment first, Tom, because it's perceived maybe that it costs money, and it does, but the return on investment is very, very quick. We've looked at this on many of the better farms in terms of grazing, and what we see and through the grassland farmer of the year competition, that we generally see that the grazing infrastructure around the yard, right, is quite good. So I'm talking about paddocks, roadways, access, water system, water, right? So those things are important, and particularly the paddock structure and the access is when the weather is tricky, which we've touched on earlier, right? So a spend of 1,000 euros per hectare or 400 euros per acre will do an awful lot in terms of roadways, water, paddock systems. 400. Yeah, 400. Now, some people will spend more, and I understand that, right? And for more elaborate systems, and that's fine. But it doesn't cost a huge amount of money. It's money that that will return very, very quickly. Lawrence has modelled it here for us in terms of return on investment, and you have your money back within 18 months to 2 years. So it's back very, very quickly. And if this allows you to get more grass into diet, particularly at the start of the year and the end of the year, like every additional ton of grass utilised is worth about 180 euros.
Where would you start, John, on a dairy farm? That's maybe got you assess the farm. It's got inadequate infrastructure, inadequate roadways, inadequate water. Paddocks probably will be all right, maybe around the park, as you said already. Maybe some of the further away ones aren't.
Yeah, and the priority really
is
that when you're trying to make the most of grass in the autumn and the spring, these are the challenges of the farm. This is where the whole farm is available to you. Right, what we generally see is that around the parlour, it's pretty good. When you go to extremities, there's where the problem is. Yet you want to utilise this grass at a time of the year, early and late, when conditions are challenging. So this is, to me, the priority area for spending. When we observe things at farm level, and obviously, the level of scale on farm is increasing all the time, so that now the farmers are moving more and more out towards the edges of the platform or take additional land beside them. So this is where the priority spend then, to me, in terms of infrastructure has, right? Because of the nature of the conditions when you're grazing it, right? Often the silage ground's at the end of the farm, but it's not often infrastructure. So the first thing is very simple, Tom. Is actually, the paddocks can be done quite easily. Temporary wires and electric fences can be erected very easily. So that's the easy part, right? Really, then is getting the first thing to me, Tom, is the roadway. To get it to this part of the farm. You can use temporary electric fences to make your paddocks, right? And then the water systems. Now we can use temporary water systems as well, but the roadway is the first priority to get there. And then when the weather is tricky, that you can get onto that roadway and get off, make life easy. So that's for starts.
Okay, very good. Okay, Pasture Base Ireland, we've probably covered, I suppose. How many farmers are using Pasture Base Ireland now, Michael?
There's over 6,000 farmers on the system. As regards to obviously we talking how many covers have been done a year, and the target for us this year is to get 2,000 farmers up around the 20 cover mark in the season. And this year has started off really well, probably on the back of the Grass 10 campaign. We're looking at probably 600 covers done a week for the first couple of weeks of February, and that's been sustained now into March.
Right.
And we, ultimately, that's what we want to see. We want to see pasture base being used, fairly extensively now. And even if guys aren't measuring grass, you can go on the landing page and you can see what the farms in your area are growing. And we would hope that this is not just for the elite; it's for all levels of the industry. And and the Grass 10 campaign, is hitting that as well. So
I understand that you launched an offline app late last year. Has that made a difference, Michael?
Yeah, so the offline app came on board towards July for the Android, and then late August for the iPhone. And I suppose we didn't have the offline app, I suppose, at the start of last year, and about 25% of the covers are now coming through the app. Okay. So that's probably about 200, 250 covers a week. And Micheál with Bestsoft has put a couple of new adaptations into the app. Milk Yield is in there, the wages in there now, the planner is in there, There's a report now on fertilizer that went in last week.
Okay.
So
they're all available back through the offline app?
They are, yeah.
Okay.
If a farmer has duplicate farms, he can go in and in just one straight login and see the 2 farms. So it's after making life, the feedback we've got is good, and we have to continue to develop, continue to make it better. And new reports. Farmers love comparing themselves to their peers. But we'll do that through the app. But I think we'll probably let the app settle down for a while, and then the budget has made a number of new, I suppose, adaptations made to it. So Pasture is going to keep evolving, and we're very open to anybody who has an idea that thinks it's fruitful. We take it on board and put it in place, and we're here. We've open ears to keep the team moving forward.
What aspect of Pasture Base Ireland, John, and do farmers most like in your experience? What's the it's a decision support tool. So what part of it do they most like?
To me, Tom, it's multifaceted, to be honest. Some farmers, they might be measuring, but they want to see what the growth rate is, and so they log on to the growth rate. The other piece, then we have the grassland management tools that Michael touched on. There's the spring rotation planner, the autumn planner, right? In the current year, 2019, okay, the growth has been quite good over the autumn, but we are seeing at farm level our observations are starting to getting tight. So this is what Michael touched on, the feed budget. That's something that's proved very, very useful to those who are at that end of it. So there's lots of little bits and pieces that that the farmers use on it, where it's growth, where it's the grass management tools, and then for the people who are very good at it, they will obviously walk the farm and use either the wedge, demand versus growth. All those things are there. And Michael's put on the new piece this time now with his team, which is the projected growth rate. So there's lots of information there. There are lots of tools there, and there are. And I suppose it's core though, which we can't forget. It enables you to grow more grass and eat more grass, fundamentally through measurement.
And what I'm hearing is that different farmers maybe like different aspects. They use different aspects of it to make the decisions for their farm.
Correct.
And they're all available.
Yes.
So just log on and find out which bit helps you to make better decisions.
Yes, absolutely.
Michael, John referred to predicted growth rates, and that is probably the latest addition to the Pasture Base page. A lot of research has gone into this, I understand. Maybe share a little bit about what kind of research, and I know there's probably models and everything, but what's involved in that, and how is that information now being used?
So Elodie Ruel, who's has been a researcher here for a number of years, and is now will be dairy contract researcher in the next couple of weeks. She has done a lot of work with Luke Elodie in France, developing the grass growth. It's called the Moparks Science Yields Grass Growth Model, and that is now going to be adapted into PBI. So last year, Elodie ran it on 4 farms, 3 research farms, and Mitchellstown farm, Ned O'Brien. Ned O'Brien's farm was very good to feed back the data to Elodie all last year. And last year was a drought, and there was it did quite well. We were happy with the predictions. We predicted the drought, and it predicted the response out of the drought. So then it's not quite ready to launch straight into PBI, but this year now we have been piloted on 40 farms across the country. So it's very much based on the cover of first the soil type. What's the soil type of whether it's a clay, whether it's a loam, and what type of soil you have, the farm cover that you have, and it's actually a model built under grazing, the fertilization pattern, and the final thing then is the net data, which is coming from Aaron every day for those farms. So Elodie runs this for the 40 farms every week on a Monday morning, and feeds back the data. And fingers crossed, it's working quite well at the moment. It's predicting growth rates. It predicted growth rates 20 kilos this week, and we're at 17. So we're really happy with it. And then the feedback from the farmers so far has been good, and they seem to have getting more and more confident with the predictions, and that's what we want to happen, and that's what we want to push Pasture Base in.
So do you anticipate that it will, as we move through March into April, that it will predict, which always happens every year, this massive ramp up in grass growth as we go in towards the middle of April? Do you think this model now will be able to predict that, or?
Well, at the moment we're quite confident. We quote today that the grass growth but the grass growth last week was 17 kilos. That's what we were quoting.
Yes.
Which is, it's ultimately we're 7 days behind where we should be.
Okay.
So Elodie is taking us to the next 10 days. And she said to us, well, I was talking to John before, the variation in monster growth is from 12 to 32 kilos. So like that's where her model is going to take us as regards managing pasture. If you know that your growth rate, I think it's a growth rate in Waterford, if that guy knows the growth rate is 32 kilos, it's pretty much on demand. But he knows then his supplementation pattern is right. Yeah. He knows that his farm cover is not going to drop. So that is a very, very powerful tool as regards the management of grass. And then you come into April, and if the model starts predicting that growth rates can get to 60 and 70 kilos, well, then you have more confidence as regards putting on silage ground, upping the stocking rate, or putting concentrate. And like that's something that we haven't had. Yes. In fact, I don't think too many nations have had it. And if we can get that and get it piloted right this year, we'll put that into development and we'll have it ready to launch 1st of January 2020.
And for this year, I think through the week you use that, or either John or Michael, are you going to share some of that data? You're going to give kind of an indication that this is what the model is predicting for certain parts of the country. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it'll be on the grass 10 weekly update, which is on
PBI.
On PBI in the top right hand side of the screen. So if you just click on that, Tom, and the grass 10 weekly update will come up, and the projected growth is there as well. Seems
like a powerful piece of information that we haven't had before. And as Michael said, it's all about giving the farmers confidence that, well, okay, last year, you might say, last year at this time of the year, growth rate took off, but that's last year. But if you can say that based on what we have this year and what we know about the weather conditions that we have, that we expect growth rate in the week ahead to be, to take off, that's a powerful piece of advice and information. So it's really great to hear that that's now available. So that's available through Pasture Base.
Yes. So just to make a comment on, look, the grass changes every week, every month, every season, right? And this projected growth rate and things like that kind of information, right? It takes the guesswork out of grass. Okay. When you have good information, better decisions are made. Okay. That's fundamentally what we're trying to do.
Okay. So I think we're coming towards the end of our webinar. There was just one area I wanted to come back on because Michael, you mentioned it at the start. It was the pasture. Yeah, no, I'll come back to the questions as well. The Pasture Profit Index, PPI. Okay. People could get confused maybe between PBI and PPI, but anyway, PPI, Pasture Profit Index. You mentioned it at the top of the webinar. What is that, and how should advisors, consultants, and farmers use it to choose better grass varieties?
Yeah, so PPI is part of the Department of Agriculture ranking of perennial ryegrasses, and if you go to page 14 of the current recommended list, it's there. Okay. So ultimately, what it is something called EBI. It's a ranking of perennial ryegrass listed in Ireland that have gone through national listing and recommended listing in Ireland, based on seasonal growth, quality, persistency, and silage and their silage values. Okay. And it ranks varieties economically based on their total merit. So we have Abigail at the top and Majestic at the bottom, with a variation of 214 versus 66 euro between those two varieties. Okay. So I think there's about 33 varieties on the recommended list who are being wholesaled by Gold Crop, Germinal Seeds, DLF. They're the main wholesalers in Ireland, and then you have co-ops like Dairy Gold, Gambia, who then are supplying more to farmers, and then you have a number of independent merchants as well. So ultimately, I suppose ultimately it's built on the back of the concept of the EBI, that you look at the sub-index, and I suppose it's putting more focus on what the variety can offer. We have some varieties there on the PPI and very, very high in spring growth, but very, very low in quality. Some varieties low in spring growth and very low in quality. So the actual, I suppose the variety and its attributes are being better quantified here in the PPI, and that means then some varieties are probably more suitable to grazing, some varieties are more suitable to intense silage cutting, and then some varieties are for the one of a better word, being outclassed. They have done their job, and now they're being superseded by better varieties. And I'm afraid that happens. It happens in plant breeding, and that's why plant breeding it should be, you know, always progressing forward. So, yeah, there's a variation in the varieties, but I suppose what we're seeing now is, you know, some outstanding varieties coming through, and you know, ultimately that's what we want to do. We want to put pressure on breeders that they produce varieties suitable to grazing, to the end user, to the farmer, and I suppose the farmer now has a good concept. You know, many farmers have monocultures on their farms on the back of the work that we're doing here.
So I was going to ask you about monocultures. Is that a recommendation now that single varieties be sown?
Well, I think what we're seeing from both Nicky Byrne's work and from Thomas Tubbert's current work is that, you know, from a grazing perspective, we're seeing huge advantages with tetrapods over diploids.
Okay.
That, you know, the grazing out and the clean out that we're getting with tetrapods is, you know, in many cases about 0.8 of a centimetre across the year higher with tetrapods than diploids. And that's significant, especially if, you know, farmers don't want to top and many of that don't want to do it, and cows are much happier with some tetrapods than, and I suppose it's not a total tetraploid thing, but the concept of a tetraploid versus diploid in a pure stand, our information would say that they're grazing tetraploids much better. Okay. So, you know, in the monoculture trial, we have some diploids not being very well grazed, and then I suppose that's why you have the industry saying, well, you know, the mixing of varieties is coming with, you know, a proportion of tetraploids and a proportion of diploids, and I suppose now the concept from our perspective would be that more tetraploids are used in those mixtures, okay, to take advantage of the benefit effects of tetraploids in with high quality PPI in those mixes. So I think a mixture on their own with someone would be fine, but you know, monocultures of diploids diploids are a bit more difficult to graze out than monocultures of tetraploids, and I suppose diploids do come with that. I suppose that warning.
Does the advice on that change if you're working on the heavy soils, John? Is there a consideration there about the trafficability? That's something that's
it crops up a lot. It's an interesting question you asked, Tom. You know, like we have a heavy soils program, and there are 10 farms across the country involved in the program, from north, south, east, and west. You know, we have put drainage systems inside those farms and put in some mixes, right, on those drain fields. And look, let's be clear about it, Tom, that the farmer, we put in varieties that were, you know, high in diploid content, quite dense, right, to improve tractability. The farmers will come back to us now and tell us, actually, you know, on those farms, now they're very good at measurement and all that, but they are very much in the camp that Michael outlined there, in terms of they want a grass that's good for the animal and that's easily grazed. And they have, you know, how to put it, they're looking for the best grasses are there, and they want us to go down the road of looking at tetraploids with them. They feel that while they are a little bit more open, they will manage the ground. Yeah, they want the best grass for the animals. Yeah. So
the farmer will manage the grazing.
So there's a change.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, right. So I think we better try and wrap it up. But I know there's a couple of questions have come in since we started, so we'll take them in order. John, I think you were talking about fertilizer P and low phosphorus paddocks, and the question is from one of our listeners: when would you attack? Is the word used? Maybe that's not the correct word, but when would you attack low phosphorus paddocks?
Well, Tom, to be straight about it, the sooner the better. Right. Phosphorus is needed in the first 6 months of the year. Needs all year round, but particularly in the first parts of the growing season, there's a big demand for phosphorus, right? By the plants to try and, you know, as Michael touched on here, to sustain growth through the spring, we can't have phosphorus limiting. And there's 3 ways of attacking it, right? We touched about the slurry, right? Okay, that's on the farm, right? And it has to go to those areas that are low in phosphorus index, ideally, and K, but with the question about phosphorus. The next piece then is obviously making best use of your fertilizer allowance, right? And that fertilizer, whatever that allowance is, targeted towards low index fields. And the third one, which we didn't touch on, Tom, I just want to mention for a minute, right? It's more longer term, but it is important, which is lime. Okay. And lime, you know, if the pH of the paddock is compromised, right, then we have to look at, you know, a twin strategy of applying P fertilizer or slurry, but also lime. Okay. The lime, you know, when the pH is low, unfortunately the phosphorus gets fixed, right? The fixation of phosphorus fertilizer is greater than phosphorus coming from slurry. So whereas compromise, I'll be more on the slurry rather than the fertilizer, but I need the fertilizer going, but I need the lime to stop the fixation when of phosphorus into the soil. The heavier the soil, the worse that is. So the bottom line is we need to try and apply the lime, and that will release the phosphorus from the soil, from the slurry, and from the fertilizer.
Okay, and you can apply lime at any time of the year. We just clarify that.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's no no limit on it either. Back to you, Michael. We were talking about on-off grazing with you. How important is water access during on-off grazing?
Well, at this point now we're getting cows, 13, 40 days into lactation, and some cows are, doing, we get milk yield this morning. Some cows up at 30 kilos a day milk yield, and they do have a demand for water. And maybe early in lactation you could get away with restricted water. Okay, grass dry matter is only 13%, but like the way I see it now is temporary water troughs. Probably if you want to go on-off grazing, you have to make use of temporary water troughs, and that's what we would do here.
Okay.
At this stage, when you've cows doing 25 litres, upwards, you are looking at having access to water.
Okay. The final two questions then are both, I think, around clover, if I'm interpreting them correctly. And we didn't touch on clover during the course of the webinar. So we'll finish on clover then. Michael, I know Deirdre Hennessy and Brian McCarthy mentioned at the top of the webinar then as two of the members of the grassland science team, and they have a number of experiments ongoing with clover. What is the research showing us about the impact of clover, I suppose? Or what can clover bring to the mix?
Well, if you look at the peak of the clover of the ConnectEd work, it was bringing nearly 50 kilos of milk solids to the mix, per cow, and that was nearly 700 litres of milk. And Deirdre's work would show about 32 kilos of milk solids per cow consistently. So, but I think there's a couple of like that question is interesting. How would it impact grazing management? But I think that there's a couple of red line things with clover. Clover will not work if there is poor soil fertility.
Okay.
And that's the first thing. If soil fertility is a bit like receiving it won't work. That's not straightened out at the start. And the grazing management, in fact, we were, talking to the lads and looking at the trial below. Grazing management has to be better with clover. Previous work, our previous history here would have been if there was a low grass cover on a clover sward, we wouldn't graze that later. But in fact, that was the wrong thing to do. It should have been grazed earlier and should have been activated earlier to grow. So I would say, the impact of grazing management, you have to be better at it. And you have to get it grazed off. You can go into higher covers. Ideally, you shouldn't be cutting silage from those paddies. Ideally, that doesn't happen. But if you are, you're cutting it at lower covers. And intake, we'd expect, we have higher intake from higher quality, and also, I suppose, better utilisation of those swards. All the ConnectEd work is shown, irrespective of variety, tension-blind or diploid, those cows have grazed, below 4 centimeters on those clover swards. So intake is higher. So to answer the question, would it impact grazing management? I think the impact of grazing management is your grazing management has to be better. Fertilizer, Deirdre's showing that she can produce 15 ton of grass with 100 kilos less nitrogen. Rotation length hasn't been changed. We would be staying towards the mainstream rotation lengths, which are 17, 18 days mid-season.
So there is potential, and I'll finish with you, John. There is potential, based on the experimental work, whether it's ConnectEd or here in Moorpark. At farm level, though, we're not seeing a huge uptake of clover. Is it the higher level of grazing management that's catching people, do you think, or is it something else? Or
there's a few factors. The grazing management is a higher standard, Tom. I don't deny that. Michael touched on the very basic first thing, Tom. Our soil fertility. We've touched on this numerous times this morning. Our soil fertility is not in the best place. The targets to get the best of the clover in terms of lime, P, and K, and sulfur are the same. However, the plant is more sensitive to it. So if we're compromising soil fertility, that has to be fixed first to me and go along with fixing. The next piece then is to move on in terms of the grazing management. It is a higher standard. So I think that makes people nervous. The other piece that we need to be conscious about, which Michael has touched on, is the availability of grass in the spring. You have to manage that a little bit differently, right? Okay, obviously, you know, clover has a higher threshold in terms of growth, in terms of temperature. You know, it's closer to 8 rather than 6 for grass. So those things, you know, we have to address them with the farmer. Again, it comes back to having information, having better practice, and then ultimately bringing change.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we're going to wrap it up on that point, John. I'd just like to mention before finishing that this was the first in a series of spring webinars delivered by Teagasc ConnectEd. The remaining seminars in the series are on the screen now. They're taking place over the next 2 months approximately. So the dairy focused webinar was today, and there are following webinars on Brexit, beef production, forestry, cereals, and water quality catchments. So if you found today's webinar beneficial, please tell others and encourage them to sign up for the upcoming webinars. Further details are available on www.teagasc.ie/connected. And my final thing then this morning is to thank my 2 guests this morning, Michael O'Donovan of the Grassland Science Department, John Maher of the Grass 10 campaign, and also to acknowledge the help from our production team of Declan McCardle and Mark Gibson. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.